There's a nice hidden lake a short walk away from my house in Parson Field, Maine. I've been going fishing there for as long as I've lived here. It's hidden away from any roads or houses, it has perfect privacy, and I would always be the only one out on the lake fishing. In fact, I would leave my kayak in the same spot by the lake whenever I wasn't using it. It was easier than lugging the thing back and forth through my house to the lake anytime I wanted to use it. I would leave it leaning up against this huge tree every time. The kayak is heavy enough to not fall over from a windstorm or anything. I also leave it covered to prevent critters from taking refuge inside. It was a warm summer's evening. I was out on the lake already for about an hour and I'd caught a few trout already, which I'd thrown into the cooler. It was dusk at this point, the little bit of light left in the sky was disappearing behind the trees. I was going to bring it in soon and just then, I heard sounds from the edge of the lake. I turned and saw someone standing at the edge of the water, tipping a barrel of some kind over, pouring its contents into the lake. It looked to me like they were polluting the lake with something. I took it upon myself to yell out, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" The person looked up at me and then ran into the woods with the contents of the barrel still pouring into the water. I looked more closely at the liquid being poured out into the lake, and it looked like a dark red liquid, though it was dark out, so I can't say with 100% certainty if it was red, but it was very dark. I felt a sense of unease creep up throughout my body. I decided I wanted to leave. I'm a big nature guy though, and seeing people littering or polluting the environment makes me sick. I genuinely couldn't resist shouting something out to that person, but I didn't feel comfortable here any longer. I planned on reporting this to the Department of Environmental Protection. I paddled the kayak back to my usual spot. I took all of my gear off the kayak before pulling it out of the water. As I was putting the cover over the kayak, I heard one single snap of something not far away, like the crunch of something under a person's shoe. I turned and was about to say, "Who's there?" but I decided against it. I finished covering the kayak quicker than I ever had before. I didn't even bother standing it up to lean on the tree this time, I left it on the ground. I picked up my gear and cooler and started quickly walking out of the woods and out to the road which led to my house. It was only a couple minutes of a walk and I was back home. I kept looking over my shoulder the entire time, thinking someone was behind me. I put my gear in the shed real quick, then went inside. I never locked the doors so quickly. I was genuinely spooked. I rinsed off the trout and put them in the fridge, planning on cooking them tomorrow. Tonight, I just heated up some leftovers. As the food was in the microwave, there was a knock at my front door. The fear and dread that I was feeling the entire walk back to the house returned in an instant, and my suspicion that I was being followed home was basically confirmed. I mean, who else would be knocking on my door this late? My lights were on, my car was in the driveway, whoever it was knew I was in here. I had all the shades closed though, so nobody could look inside. They knocked on the door again. The microwave beeped as the timer hit 0. I'm sure whoever was outside heard it. All the windows were cracked open and a moment later, there was a knock now on the window and a man's voice said through the window, "Excuse me, I think you saw me at the lake earlier." I'd just like to explain myself. There was absolutely no chance I was opening the door to this person. For them to stalk me to my house told me this was a dangerous person. They repeatedly knocked on the window and kept yelling, "Hello," through it. I decided to acknowledge him now that he was getting more aggressive. I yelled, "Yo, leave or I'll call the police." I intended to either way, but it was still a threat to get him to leave. The man responded calmly now, saying, "Sir, if you could just open the front door, I'll explain everything to you." I repeated my threat, and I didn't hear his voice again. At this point, I shut and locked every window in the house and turned on the AC. I also made a report to the non-emergency police number, detailing both the barrel being dumped into the lake and the man coming to my house. I also made an online report with the Department of Environmental Protection. Making these 2 reports honestly made me feel a little better about going to sleep that night. But thank God I'm a light sleeper. In the middle of the night, around 2 a.m., I heard a crash from downstairs. I immediately sprang out of my bed and grabbed my Glock from the closet. I heard someone's attempt at quiet footsteps coming up the creaky wooden steps. I had my Glock loaded in hand as I stood behind my dresser right by my closet, aiming at the door. I heard very slow creeping towards my door. My bedroom door is closest to the stairs, so it was naturally the first door that they would approach. And sure enough, I heard the doorknob slowly pressed down and then the door pushed open. I saw nothing but the man's silhouette enter the room. I flicked on the lamp next to me so he could see my gun, and I screamed, "Get on the ground now." He raised his hands in the air and seemed for a second to be motioning for me to calm down. He had a small blade in his hand. I told him to drop it, but then he said calmly, "I'm leaving," and he turned and ran for downstairs. I yelled at him to stop, but he clearly took the chance on me being too afraid to pull the trigger. I heard him leave through the front door. I ran downstairs to lock the front door right away and then called 911. My living room window was shattered, glass was all over the floor. I kept my sight on that broken window until the police officer showed up. I had to explain that I already made a non-emergency report of what happened earlier, in fear of waiting too long by morning for the barrel to be gone in the darkness. I went with 2 of the officers who showed up to my house to where I saw that man dumping the barrel into the lake, but after 20 minutes of walking around looking for it, it was gone. The man must have made sure not to leave it behind. I gave my best description of the man to the police for their report. The man was a short, bearded white man with a receding hairline and glasses, wearing a black flannel shirt and black pants. After the police left, I stayed in the living room all night with my gun next to me, watching TV. No way in hell was I going to sleep with a broken window and some nut job out there. At dawn, my brothers came over to help me fix the window. My brother Azaria stayed at the house while my other brother and I went to Home Depot to get the window and parts. Azaria stayed at the house with me for a few nights till things cooled down. My not-so-wild theory is that the barrel contained human remains, possibly dissolved in some kind of acid. Why else would that man follow me home and then break into my house to potentially murder me? Trust your gut if something feels wrong. I knew if I opened my door to that man, something terrible might have happened to me. This happened in the early summer of 2020, right when COVID was at its peak. I'm sure most of you can relate to staying at home during quarantine and not being able to go out. With the constant boredom of staying locked away inside of my house, I decided to take a day for a fishing trip. I live in South Florida, a place where it's notorious to go fishing. My state was still on lockdown, but I didn't care. I drove about an hour's drive away to Key West and went under a bridge to where I was sure I would get a decent catch. The waves were a little rough, but it didn't matter. Fast forward to about 30 minutes later, I'm still fishing, waiting for a bite. I look to my left and see what appeared to be a blue tarp setup behind one of the pillars of the bridge. I thought nothing of it, but for whatever reason, I looked back and saw a man standing there looking at me. To be honest, he kind of startled me as I jumped a little bit and nodded my head as a hello. However, he didn't seem to acknowledge my greeting as he kept staring at me with this blank expression I couldn't even describe. By the looks of it, he looked homeless, worn, torn clothes and had a full-on white beard, kind of like what you would picture as your typical old fisherman. What made me unsettled, however, was that his right hand was always behind his back. I pretended to concentrate on fishing, but I could still feel his gaze looking at me. Suddenly, he then jumps into the water and is swimming directly toward me. Even with the rough waves and the current from under the bridge, he was extremely fast. I was out from under that bridge in less than 15 seconds and got in my car with my foot glued to the gas pedal. I also left my stuff behind as, obviously, my life was more worth saving than that. I drove about a few miles where I stopped at a gas station for a snack and then proceeded to go home. What that man was going to do to me or what he wanted, I don't know. I assumed he was probably a dangerous homeless person who didn't like people near where he lived. The next day, I drove back to the bridge and tried to get my stuff, only to find it gone. Not only that, but the blue tarp and the man were also gone. Nothing was left except for an old hunting knife left on one of the platforms where the pillars were held up. After seeing it, I knew that's probably what he was hiding behind his back. Far from civilization, nestled deep within a remote valley, flowed a river teeming with life and death in equal measure. It was said that the spirits of those who had perished in its unforgiving currents still haunted its banks, seeking vengeance on the living who dared to trespass upon their domain. Among the bravest, or perhaps the most foolish, was Nadia, a thrill-seeker with a penchant for danger that bordered on obsession. Determined to test her mettle against the river's legendary inhabitants, she embarked on a solo kayaking expedition, heedless of the warnings that echoed in her ears. As she navigated the treacherous rapids, Nadia felt a chill wind sweep down from the mountains, carrying with it whispers of the past and the promise of doom. Ignoring the sense of unease that gnawed at her insides, she pressed on, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. But as she rounded a bend in the river, she was greeted by a sight that froze the blood in her veins. A spectral figure, pale and ethereal, drifted silently upon the water's surface, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, fixated upon Nadia with a hunger that sent shivers down her spine. Paralyzed with terror, she watched as the figure drew nearer, its form twisting and contorting with each passing moment. And then, with a sudden burst of speed, it lunged forward, its icy fingers closing around Nadia's throat with a grip that stole the very breath from her lungs. Gasping for air, she fought against the spectral assailant, her paddle swinging wildly as she struggled to break free. But the spirit's grasp was unyielding, its grip tightening with each passing second until Nadia could feel her consciousness slipping away. Just when all seemed lost, a blinding light pierced the darkness, driving back the specter with a force that sent it shrieking into the night. Blinking away tears of relief, Nadia found herself face to face with a figure bathed in radiant light, a guardian spirit come to her aid in her hour of need. With a gentle touch, the spirit guided Nadia to safety, its presence warding off the malevolent forces that lurked within the river's depths. And as she emerged from the water, shaken but alive, she knew that she would never again tempt fate in the haunted waters that lay beyond. Throughout my life, I would go through phases of different hobbies. I'd pick something that interests me, obsess over it for a year or so, and then find something new to keep myself entertained. During the summer of 2022, I was big into fishing. About an hour's drive away is a shore house my family has owned for decades that's on the water with a lagoon and a small Boston whaler. My friends and I would take frequent trips there to fish and just chill. It was the following October, after summer, when my two friends, Asher and Victor, decided to hit the shore house for a weekend to try to catch some striper, as they're abundant during the fall months. Asher was an avid fisherman, which was a big reason why I got into the whole fishing craze in the first place. Unfortunately, during this time, our boat was out of the water due to maintenance, so we'd have to fish off the beach and piers. This was no problem, though, as Asher had all the necessary rods and gear to do so. We got together on a Friday afternoon and I drove us all down. When we got there, we fished during the day off of different piers along the inlet. Night rolled by, and only one of us had caught a fish, which was Asher, of course. It was just a small bass though, nothing too exciting. Bummed about our luck, we decided to stay up late to fish off the beach during the night. Asher said he knew a good beach spot about 20 minutes away, which took us down a desolate road with woods on both sides. It opened up into a small gravel parking area, or at least what seemed like one. Asher said since we'd have to walk a little ways to the spot, we should take everything we need now so we wouldn't have to go back to the car to get anything. We planned on staying up to catch the sunrise, so we packed accordingly. We walked about 5 minutes down this path, which opened up into a massive beach. We set up camp, which consisted of beach chairs, a speaker, and 2 coolers, one filled with ice for fish and one filled with snacks, water, and beers. Asher brought these massive fishing rods that were ideal for beach fishing and also rod holders that you would hammer into the sand. He also had these little bells that connect to the tip of the rod to notify you of any movement. We all cast our rods, cracked a couple of beers, and played the waiting game. Within 2 hours, each of us had caught decent-sized fish, which definitely lightened our spirits. We were having a great time, music blasting, knowing that no one was around on this deserted beach. Mid-conversation, Victor stopped talking, lowered the music, and jolted his head to the left. He asked if we heard that, to which we replied, "Heard what?" It looked like he was concentrating on something for a second and then said, "I heard someone yell something." We obviously thought he was hearing things or just joking with us, but he insisted he heard someone yell out something that sounded like a "yo" or a "hey." Either way, it seemed unlikely given that we were on some hidden beach at like 1 a.m., so he quickly forgot about it and our conversation resumed. It definitely made us more aware, though. A couple of minutes later, right after I cast in a fresh hook, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. There was something on the beach in the distance, but I couldn't see what exactly. The others noticed it too. As it got closer, we realized what it was, a person walking towards us. We grew silent and turned off the music. He came up to us. It was a middle-aged white man, maybe 40 or 50. He was wearing a dark blue jacket with a hat and hood up. The way he walked up to us was really sketchy, and he had this intimidating look on his face. We said, "What's up?" kind of awkwardly. He just eyed us down for like 10 seconds and then said in a low voice, "What are you boys up to?" It was pretty apparent what we were up to. Asher said, "We're fishing," and he let out some grunt of acknowledgement and nodded his head. He didn't say a word after that and just stood there, looking at us, then at the rods, and then at the water. We shot each other looks, thinking he was going to try and rob us. There was no way he could have taken on the 3 of us, though. The bell on one of our rods broke the silence, notifying us that we had potentially hooked a fish. I said, "We got one," kind of directed at everyone but mostly at that weird guy in hopes that I would get some response out of him like a normal person. I walked over to the rods and reeled in a small striper. When I went back to unhook the fish, that man had turned around and left. We watched as his dark silhouette faded away into the night. We made sure that we had all of our belongings, then sat and just talked about how odd that encounter was. He left without harming us, though, so we concluded that he was just some weird man who was now, thankfully, out of our business. We kept the music off just to be cautious and cracked a few more beers as our conversation transitioned to different topics. At one point, while staring into the horizon, I thought I heard something in the distance. It took me a second to realize what it was, but when I did, my heart dropped. It was a car alarm. I knew it was mine. It was the only car in that lot, and there were no houses out there for probably miles. We started panicking and decided to run back to the car, leaving all of our stuff behind. It took us a couple of minutes to get there, and when we did, I was completely distraught. My tires had been slashed, and my driver's side window had been shattered. I got on my phone with the police immediately and told them my location and situation. The operator asked if I knew who may have done it, and we said some sketchy guy came up to us as we were fishing. She asked if I knew where he went, and I said no. Just as I said this, we heard rustling in the woods around us. My heart rose into my throat. I felt trapped. We frantically ran like 200 yards down the road and hid in the trees. I told the operator this, and she said to stay hidden and keep quiet. Within 10 minutes, we saw 2 cop cars speed up with their lights on. We ran back to the car and saw 3 officers searching the area. Multiple things had been stolen, including my wallet, some cash that was in the glove box, and the remainder of Asher's fishing gear. They found a large knife lying on the ground nearby, which they took for fingerprints and evidence. I told them the whole story, with my adrenaline still pumping. They said we were smart to run away and hide, as it's very likely this man meant us harm. Those words made me appreciate my life so much more. The officers made us feel safe and were nice enough to help us pack up the equipment and carry it back. They took down our information and gave us a ride back to the house. We stayed up all night reflecting on what had just happened. That morning, Victor got us a ride up north, and I picked up my car from the shop a few days later. To this day, this is by far the most frightening experience I've ever had. What was supposed to be a normal fishing trip became a terrifying ordeal that cost me hundreds of dollars worth of damages. I never got a call back from the police, meaning that guy is probably still out there. Needless to say, I gave up fishing as a hobby and haven't touched it since. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.